Welcome to Black Sci-Fi TV, where we do our best to inspire your imagination. I'm your host, Maurice Waters. Today, we're diving into the iconic universe of Star Trek and its profound impact on Black culture. From groundbreaking characters like Lieutenant Uhura to the visionary storytelling that inspires countless fans, we'll discuss how Star Trek has shaped and reflected the aspirations of experiences of the Black community. So join us as we boldly go where no conversation has gone before. Today, our guests are Darlena Marie, who is an avid Trek cosplayer and has moderated several panels at Star Trek conventions. George Carmona III, who's an artist, designer, and illustrator and has worked for DC Comics, Milestone Media, and also is a writer for BlackSci-Fi.com. And last but not least, Robert Jeffrey, who is a writer, creator of the comic book Route 3. He's written for DC Comics, he writes video games, and is the editor-in-chief of BlackSci-Fi.com. Welcome to the show. Darlena, let's start with you. And can you tell me about your first experience with Star Trek and how it impacted you?
Sure. Thanks for the invite again. And my family is Star Trek fans. So at age 5, we were, watching Star Trek together as a family. My mom made my first Lieutenant Uhura dress at 7, and we went to convention together at Pennsylvania Hotel here in New York. So my family's a big Star Trek fan. Every incarnation, we're always watching, having dinner together, talking about the episodes. My family would ask me, my parents would ask us, how do we feel about the episode? What did we learn? So I've had Star Trek in my life for the longest time. Got into cosplaying, going to conventions, panels. And for me, I use Star Trek more as a discussion on political and human experience issues. So I've used Star Trek episodes to have discussions about race. When my job was doing a diversity campaign, I was asked to speak, and I actually used clips from Let This Be a Last Battlefield, where the one people who had one half of their face was black, the other half was white. So I used that as a little bit of a discussion tool, which everyone enjoyed. For my cadets, I will use different Star Trek episodes that deal with young people in the military and how they feel about serving. Um, I also use Star Trek episodes that dealt with when Starfleet officers were injured and they had post-traumatic stress. I've used those kind of episodes to talk with my veterans about PTSD and things like that. So I like to use Star Trek to, engage people in talking about the human experience and interpersonal relationships.
Wow, that's interesting. And Robert, what about you? What was your first experience like and how did it impact you?
So I think for me, the first experience probably would have been watching the Star Trek: The Next Generation on syndicated TV for the kids at home. That's when we had a bunch of channels on network TV. Everything wasn't streaming, but I would watch episodes of that series and kind of because I love sci-fi. But the Trek show that I started watching on a weekly basis was D Space Nine, and the big reason for that was eventually he became Captain Benjamin Lafayette Sisko. So seeing a black man at the lead of this series was something that drew me in. And then from there, it kind of grew into this like not typical Trek story because it was based on a station. They weren't going out to explore. They were dealing with more political, kind of social, and even religious, discussions, and just focused on things that Trek dealt with, but it became a bit more serious with this. So there was just something different about DS9, and that's kind of where my like huge obsession with Trek grew. I mean, you can see the Enterprise blueprint behind me. I had a dad who loved sci-fi, and we would watch the series together, and we would talk about the messages and the themes of the episodes. Afterwards. So it just kind of grew out of a love of science fiction and wanting to see a world which was more reflective of where I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. Like you could look around on the promenade, or you could look around on the Enterprise, and you could see Black, brown, Asian, men, women, just everybody there. Versus in a lot of other sci-fi science fiction properties where with star in the name of it, where we weren't represented. I mean, I guess you could say, like, I don't know, no shade or whatever, but that was just something that kind of appealed to me, and also the idea that there was a brighter future after we had gone through all the BS, just to learn to grow, beyond where we were. So that was my first experience, and why it's kind of become my number one fandom. I'm actually doing a rewatch of Voyager right now. So
Okay, and what about you, George?
So it seems like Star Trek has always been around for me. In New York City, the early, in the 70s, 80s, it was Channel 11, which is PIX, CW for nationwide folks. It was always on during the summer. So me and my cousins would watch it. Sometimes it was on twice a day, 12 noon, 12 midnight. And we, just watch it again and again and again, even though it was 70 some odd episodes. We knew them by heart. We watched them. I'm also old enough to have seen the motion picture in theaters. I might have been too young, wasn't really getting all of it. It was a little slow for a kid, but as an adult, I appreciate it more.
Mhm.
It's a better movie than people give it credit for.
Okay.
Besides that, Trek has stayed in my life. I've been writing for you guys with some Star Trek stuff. Get to meet some of the writers, some of the people behind the scenes. Got to be in a couple of Star Trek books because of my old boss put me in. So Star Trek is in the DNA.
So let me just ask a question to clear something up for the general populace. What is the right term? Are you a Trekkie or a Trekker? Like, what does that mean at all anyway? Anybody want to take it on?
Well, for me, the Trekkie was the first term when I started getting into Star Trek groups. They were called Trekkies, and most of the groups I was a part of, it was what you would consider your typical geek white male kind of dominated groups, and so Trekkie was the thing. And then I think after they made these uh, different shows where they were kind of like making satirical comedy about Star Trek fans, the term Trekker came up to be a more mature term dedicated to people who enjoy Star Trek. And because of the theme of Star Trek, as everyone said about the hope for a better tomorrow, respect for diversity, it became the Trekker is someone who loves Star Trek because of its emphasis on diversity and inclusion and a better tomorrow, more so than the techie aspects of Star Trek, like when warp
Mhm.
drive came into being and things like that. So I tend to go, I don't mind either, but I tend to myself prefer Trekker.
Mhm. And you touched on it, and Rob did as well, about one of the appeals of Star Trek being a better tomorrow and a better future. And I think that's an overall theme in sci-fi appeared, that there's a notion or belief that the future is colorblind, or sci-fi is colorblind. And do you feel that it is, when you watch Trek in these episodes? Do you feel that there is inclusion and diversity, and is it addressing things from the black perspective in there, or what do you see that that most people aren't seeing?
Um, me, so for me,
Anybody wants to jump in?
no, I get it. I mean, Lieutenant Uhura is like, my goddess, and I've done panels on how her role has changed, down through the ages, changed the image of Black women and other women of color in TV and media, and because of Star Trek, I develop a way of thinking where if I go see movies and TV shows, unless it's a reason for there not to be Black people in it, like if you're doing a show on something Nazi
yeah.
Germany, or you're doing a
Mhm.
show, a historical show about something in Europe, other than that, if I don't see like brown, I don't look at it, I
Mhm.
don't watch it, I don't buy it. I just don't, I'm not into it anymore. I'm not into that hiding us.
Yep.
I refuse to accept that. And that's one of the things that Star Trek has done for me. It made me more proactive in making sure that when I go to get into any type of TV show or movie or whatever, I need to make sure that there's representation. So it made me very adamant about that. And I share this with the with my fellow black folk, because I want, like when Deep Space Nine came out, I really pushed for black people to watch Deep Space Nine, and a lot of black people who was not into Star Trek and thought it was geeky or whatever got into Deep Space Nine, and that black captain, as well as Discovery, with the black women captain. It really helped representation. Matters, and then, Avery Brooks is such a strong black male character and leader, and didn't take what, and then then that religious element, like seeing him as a god, black
Yeah.
man as God. I mean, it was kind of irresistible, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you take the Cisco character that Avery Brooks played, and you compare that to Lieutenant Uhura, and in terms of jobs that they had, that she had, she was really like an administrative, or head of communications, but was more administrative. And then now you fast forward to Deep Space Nine, where we're dealing with management. And one of the things that I liked about Star Trek Deep Space Nine with Cisco was, one, to really see, an African American male in a management position, where he was the one that was leading and giving the orders, and at the same time he'd cook for you. So yeah, you're going to listen and take orders, but wait a minute, before you go, let me make this low and something. So there was, like, a lot of dimensions that we saw in Cisco. Do you see that happening now with the new series that they have? They have the cartoon Lower Deck. There's A Brave New World,
Strange New
and
Worlds.
Star
With the
Trek
world.
Discovery. Do you still see those themes and those positive images coming out of African Americans or Black people at large in the series?
Oh yes, definitely, definitely, and even the more so because now they have us as aliens in charge of planets, so that's pretty
Mhm.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to say about the Lieutenant of Horror, I know a lot of people classify communications as administration, but from a military perspective,
Mhm.
the commo officer is someone that is very important, right there up with the captain and everything, because when you start getting attacked, it's your commo officer that's going to be calling in for backup. So, from a
Okay.
military perspective, the role of communication officer is very valuable. It's right there with captain, and then your number one, your secure, and your top security person, and your commo,
Mhm.
and your medical person. Those are like the five main people you want with you on any mission. So, and that's why I love Lieutenant. I was always a military buff too. My dad was Navy, Uncle Marine, so they watched war movies. And it was always the commo officer, the commo officer. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, Star
Okay.
Trek has done a good job with the incarnations and keeping the black folks out there and
Yeah.
in positions of authority.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Well,
mean,
that's an interesting point. I wasn't aware of that. So there's still some education to go on, with the series as well. Um, do you feel
Maurice,
that?
I wanted
Yes. Go
to hop on, just like showing love for this current iteration, this current generation of Trek, and like you said, representation. Um, I think between the Discovery, Lower Decks, Picard, Strange New Worlds, and then we have shows that are coming up now. As far as representation for us, it's been huge. It's been huge, in terms of having black women at the lead. I think discussions of like sexuality, like the different ranges of the sexual spectrum, and seeing Sonequa Martin Green leading the show, the series that basically kickstarted this generation of Trek is a huge thing, and I don't think that show or she gets enough credit. She gets enough credit for that. But I think that with the representation that's behind the scenes in terms of directing, producing, show running, writing, and everything, even going to like the hair. I saw a discussion with the actress that plays Rafi, who was talking about getting representation with the hairstylist. That's where we're at now. So I think we are in a good place. It definitely could. It'll. I hope that it grows and it continues to stay that way. We do see Hollywood kind of shutting doors on a lot of in a lot of ways, but Trek, I'm happy with where we're at, but I just hope that it continues to get bigger and better, with the representation from where we started to where we are going. We have Star Trek, the Starfleet Academy series coming out, and We have novelizations of like the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, which hadn't been done, before. Like, that was a huge thing. So I know that this generation of Trek gets a lot of flack and a lot of hate. And it's never like a lot of it isn't constructive criticisms. But I am like a proponent of giving love to like what they've accomplished, especially for Black fans.
Yeah, I want to agree with that. This generation with Discovery, they took a lot of stuff, trying to keep it clean,
Mhm.
for being different, for being diverse, for pushing the edge on what is normal. This is normal. This is, you walk out the door, you walk on the street, and there's everybody out there. You go to your job, it's not just one type of person working there. So Discovery did an amazing job of doing that, showcasing the vast majority of people that walk the earth. So
And just for the audience that may not be aware of all the different iterations of Star Trek, you have the original, which is Star Trek, or some people refer to it as classic Trek. Then you have Next Generation, Star Trek: The Next Generation. Then it goes to Star Trek D Space Nine, which is what we were mentioning here. Then it goes into Star Trek Enterprise, and I think from there it goes to. Am I missing something?
you skipped Voyager.
Oh, Voyager. Yeah, how can I miss Voyager? So Voyager, then Enterprise, then we have Discovery, which is the first time that there is a black woman that's the head of is the captain, and it is in command. And then we also have Star Trek Brave New World, which is sort of like a prequel to the original series, even though they're kind of jumping back and forth from time, but that's basically that. And then you have Lower Deck, which is present time, and it's an animation that talks about everybody working in the lower decks of the ship. So you always hear about the main crew, but this is about the lower decks and the ensigns and them trying to work their way up within it. So iterations that you have. One of the things I want to talk to you guys about is I noticed, in my opinion, and I'd like to hear your opinion. It seems like, and maybe that's just a trend in sci-fi, period, that the newer Star Treks aren't heavy in science. And what I mean by that is that you don't hear a lot of storylines that have a lot of science implications. It's a lot more action oriented, more graphic oriented. Do you see that as the case? And
Uh,
why do you think that is? And do you think they should go back?
no, so
Uh,
No.
I'm a double Dutch in here. I'm sorry, because one of the shows that I accidentally left off, which is actually one of my favorites, deals heavily in science. They even have a science advisor, Star Trek Prodigy. And if you
Oh
watch,
yeah, right.
yeah, I think they're like two seasons in, and they both
Hmm.
seasons can be watched on Netflix instead of Paramount. Go figure. But less said about that than whatever. But Prodigy, I know specifically, has a science advisor on the series. Now, I do agree that starting with the reboot of the Abrams verse, that Trek became more action oriented because they're trying to bring in a new group of fans, who aren't familiar with Trek. I mean, we love the submarine esque battles of the previous movies with the original series crew, but they needed some explosions. They needed some kicking. They needed some phaser fights. But within all of the new shows that I've watched, at least, science does play a part. I mean, there's so much technobabble in going from not Strange New Worlds, starting with Discovery to Strange New Worlds. It seems like typical Trek, but that is definitely mixed in with more action, with more phaser fights, with more. I'm sorry, the fight choreography is better than it used to be back in the day. I'm sorry, like one chop to the neck and people falling out. I I like the fight choreography that we have now, but that science is still there. No
Hmm.
matter what series you're watching.
Hmm.
yeah,
And how
I
do you?
want to.
Yeah,
Oh
go ahead.
no, I want to say I strongly agree that, because Discovery is a science ship. It's not an explorer like the Enterprise. It's not a warship like the Defiant. It's specifically built to do science. And for the most part, they science their way out of all of their
Yes.
problems with the show. They literally have, I mean, unfortunately, they talk about science saving the day. You know,
Mhm.
that was their whole way of doing things. There were explosions here and there, but it was science behind that explosion. So
And and just I have a military question that I think about with this, and that all the Star Treks, the captain goes down to the planet, right? The captain is the one that really gets all the action. But in true life military, is the captain the one that goes out, or is that the protocol? Is that the right
No,
protocol?
no. No, it depends on the mission. But most time, no, the captains and the higher ranks stay behind, and the lower officers and NCOs go out. Uh, it's very rarely that captains will go. If there's a need to meet another captain of another unit, and whether it's the same fighting force or a different fighting force, then okay. But most of the time, no. But again, Star Trek is more so exploration as opposed to military. So it is appropriate for the captain to go out and make contact and everything. The thing with Star Trek has always been that the military is there, but it's not the lead. So, like our military operations, military protocols take place with Star Trek. Though it has a military arm, its mission is mostly exploration and introduction to other life forms. So, and that's been the passion with Star Trek. I like the action and everything. I know that's necessary, particularly for movies. I don't mind a lot of action for movies, but for TV series, I expect the same kind of emphasis on the human element and human discussion. We work our way out problems through human discussion and human coming together. Um, with other life forms in their intelligence, in their science, and their um, their experience with one another and with those from the outside, and we work our problems out that way. That has always been my thing that I love so much about Star Trek, and I like to see that continue a little bit more. Some of the science, though, I will have to say, is a little bit just overkill. Like it's not even like plausible. Like the science that's we know is sci-fi, but then it needs to be something that kind of sounds plausible. That's my thing with Discovery. Some of his science is just it's just out of this world. Like it's not even plausible.
Well, like
That's
for
me. That's
example,
just
for like
me.
the living being that's the hyperdrive, something like that, or like what's an example that you think is too far?
Well, I don't want to get into it, but it's just a lot with some of their science just doesn't make sense to me at all when I
Hmm.
compare it to the science for particularly Next Generation, DS9, and then Voyager. But that's okay because the main thing is that the it still has the personal element there. It still has the zeal for exploring, and at the end of the day, outside of whether we agree about the science being plausible or sounding correct, what's beautiful is still, even with Discovery, even though it's a science ship, it did had a lot of episodes that dealt with, just getting down into people experiencing life through each other's eyes and working out their differences and coming to awareness of the similarities that they have. And then once they establish that, then they bring in the science and everything to help solve the problem. So I do see the incarnations keeping that theme, and
Right.
that's what we were hoping for, because when they started with this Discovery, they said that there was going to be a little bit different than the normal way of approaching Star Trek episodes. So everyone got concerned. We didn't want it to be just action, 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 and then
Hmm.
you leave out that part that drew people to Star Trek to begin with. Um,
Hmm.
and I think they did get away from that a little bit, and then the fans was complaining, so then they started bringing more of the relationship aspect into it. A lot of the episodes, starting with Discovery on, and Strange New Worlds, I think does a perfect balance of new incarnation type of Star Trek with a lot of action, but still keeping the old theme of Star Trek and that relationship development between those of us on Earth and who we meet and when we explore the different planets.
Mhm. And as we talk about overall themes, and anybody can jump in on this. The one reoccurring theme from every series that they have is the Prime Directive, right?
Right.
Which is to not interfere with cultures in a way that could radically change their society. However, they are constantly interfering with other people's societies and cultures. And how do you guys feel about that? Good, bad, indifferent? Why don't we do it here in the States? You know,
I mean, what?
do you agree with what they do?
I
I
mean, I
mean,
think, no, George, you go first. You go first.
no, I was like, it's colonialism in a way. I feel like Quark said it best. They go out there. They're almost like the Borg, the Federation,
Hmm.
and they slowly assimilate people, not as abruptly as the Borg do, but little by little they bring them in. So
Hmm.
the Prime Directive, I could leave or take. I understand it for what it is as a story element to help drive the plot. So, not a big fan of the Prime Directive. If people need help, you got to
Hmm.
help them.
So there was
Yeah. Anybody else want?
yeah, I was gonna say there's I call it the cousin show, one of the cousin shows to Star Trek, the Orville. They recently, and I was just talking to my wife about this, which is crazy as far as like the timing of this. They had an episode, spoiler, where they there was a character who wanted asylum from her world, which wasn't as technologically advanced as the Earth of the Orville's world, of the universe of the Orville, and they're basically like it's like a Star Trek, type style show. So she stole some technology, tried to take it back to her home world, and the first command, the I'm sorry, the commander or the second in command, took her to like this holodeck and basically showed her what happened when I think their planetary federation tried to give technology to a planet that wasn't ready for it. And it starts off as this like very nice, pristine area, and then it cuts over to like this blighted out nuclear wasteland because they essentially try to play God. They essentially try to spread their ideas to another world which wasn't ready for it. So I always say that one of the best Prime Directive episodes was a non Star Trek related show. But all that to say, the Prime Directive is something that I like George kind of hinted at or said is that it's whatever drives the plot, at that point, because every captain that we've seen has basically tossed the Prime Directive to the side to basically be like, we have to do the right thing. So one of the things that, and I think that they do try to relay or impart what could happen to a world if you do that. But remember, like in the first episode of Strange New Worlds, Pike was like, YOLO, let's do this. And he just like he flies the Enterprise over the horizon of this world, and like everybody's like, well, I guess we stop fighting wars now, right? So where's the Prime Directive then?
Right.
It's funny because Enterprise actually, because that's like the early days of the Federation and Starfleet, they have, I think, episodes that treat that idea well of like, these are the issues that we'll have. But I don't know the name of that episode of the Orville, but like that one scene in that holodeck area that they had was enough to be like, okay, maybe we should, take our time with this, rather than trying to push our ideals and onto other worlds, which is always, I felt, has been like a stand-in for colonialism. Like, we spread our ideals of like what the civilized world is and what
Hmm.
Christianity and just all of this.
Hmm.
So it's something that I think serves the plot, but it's something that is not really adhered to, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but check out that Orville episode.